I heard it through the baby monitor. That's the part nobody asks about. They ask how I found out, and I say I overheard them, and they nod like they understand. But they don't picture the baby monitor. The little white one my daughter asked me to keep in the guest room after my granddaughter was born, so I could hear her as she woke up during nap time and my daughter was in the garden. I'd kept it on the nightstand ever since. Habit. Comfort, maybe. The sound of a child breathing in the next room is one of the better sounds in this world. It was a Tuesday in November. I remember because I'd just come in from raking the backyard, the kind of cold, clear afternoon where you can smell wood smoke from 3 streets over. I was standing at the kitchen sink washing my hands when I heard my son-in-law's voice come through the monitor. Low, careful. The voice of a man who thinks he's alone. Your dad's not going to live here forever, Becca. We need to start being realistic. I turned off the faucet. I know, my daughter said, and those 2 words, I know, landed somewhere in my chest and just sat there. The house is worth a lot more than it was when he bought it. A lot more. And he's 64. He's healthy now. But what? But we should look into places. Good ones. Nice ones. Not depressing. He'd be comfortable. They have activities, they have. He has a house, my daughter said. But her voice didn't have fight in it. It had the sound of someone who'd already had this conversation with herself and lost. Our house, my son-in-law said quietly. Becca, eventually. I stood at that sink for a long time after they stopped talking. The water dripped from my fingertips onto the stainless steel. Outside the window, one last red leaf came off the maple tree in the backyard. The maple I'd planted the year my daughter was born. My name is Frank Corley. I'm 64 years old, retired civil engineer, widower, going on 6 years. And what I'm about to tell you is the story of the longest winter of my life, and also, somehow, the one that gave me back my footing. My wife, Joanna, died of an aggressive cancer in the spring 6 years ago. We had 31 years together. We bought this house when my daughter was 2, 3 bedrooms, a garage that became my workshop, a backyard big enough for a swing set and later a garden that Joanna tended like it was her second child. When she died, my daughter, she was 28 then, came back home for 3 weeks. She slept in her old room. She helped me go through her mother's things. She cried more than I did, I think. Or at least she cried where I could see her. I thought that meant something. I suppose it did. Just not what I assumed. She'd married her husband 4 years before Joanna died. He's a project manager at a logistics company. Good salary, careful with money, the kind of man who brings a spreadsheet to a conversation about vacation. I never disliked him exactly. He was polite to me. He remembered my birthday. It just always made me feel like a line item, something to be managed efficiently. After Joanna died, they started coming around more. Sunday dinners. My granddaughter was born 14 months later, the one good explosion of joy in that grey period, and for a while the house filled up again the way houses should. My granddaughter learned to walk in this living room. She called the workshop Grandpa's Cave. She used to fall asleep on my shoulder during football games she had no interest in. I thought we were fine. I genuinely thought we were fine. What I didn't see, what I was too grateful for their company to notice, was that my son-in-law had started treating my home like a pending asset. Small things, looking back, comments about the neighborhood appreciating, questions about whether I'd ever thought of simplifying, a brochure that appeared on the kitchen counter once for a senior living community 40 minutes away, and when I asked about it, he said, "Oh, someone at work gave it to him. He didn't know how it got there." I didn't push. I should have pushed. After the baby monitor, I didn't say anything. I went out to the back porch and sat until the cold got into my knees, and I couldn't sit anymore. Then I came in and made dinner, and we ate together, and I watched my son-in-law refill my granddaughter's milk and help her cut her chicken, and I thought, he's not a monster. That's what made it so hard. He wasn't a monster. He was a practical man who had decided that my life was an inconvenience with a good market value. I slept badly that night, and the night after. By the end of that week, I'd made a decision, which was to do nothing rash and to pay attention. I started paying attention. Over the next 2 months, I noticed things I'd been too comfortable to see before. The way my son-in-law steered conversations toward my health. "You doing okay, Frank? You seem tired." I wasn't tired. I was 64 and I'd just come back from a 4-mile walk, but I said I was fine, thanks. The way he talked about the house, not to me but around me, with that particular tone of a man inventorying what isn't his yet. I noticed my daughter's silences, the way she changed the subject when he got going, the way she sometimes looked at me with an expression I hadn't been able to read before, and now could. Guilt. She knew. She wasn't driving it, but she knew. The week before Christmas, I called my old friend from the engineering firm, a man named Stu, who'd retired the same year I did and spent his second act becoming a reasonably decent estate attorney. We'd had lunch every month or two for years. I told him I wanted to review my situation. He said, "Come in Thursday." I sat across from Stu in his office and I told him what I'd heard through the baby monitor. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at me over his reading glasses the way he's always done, a look that means he's deciding what order to say things in. "You were planning to leave the house to her outright," he said. "That was the plan, yes." "And now?" "Now I want to leave it to my granddaughter. Through a trust. Something that can't be sold, can't be leveraged, can't be touched until she's 25. The house stays in the family. It's just not their family." Stu looked at me a moment longer. "You understand this will cause a confrontation?" "I expect so." "And you're prepared for that?" "Stu," I said, "I've been prepared for it since November. I've just been waiting to understand what I actually want." What I actually wanted, I'd realized somewhere in those 2 months of bad sleep and careful watching, was not revenge. I want to be clear about that because the word gets thrown around. What I wanted was to stop being managed. I wanted the house where my wife had grown her garden to outlast both of our children's bad decisions. I wanted my granddaughter to have something solid under her feet when she grew up, something no one could negotiate away. We drew up the trust in January. Stu recommended a second attorney for review, which I appreciated. We were thorough. When it was done, my name was still on the house. I would live there as long as I lived. After me, it would pass into trust for my granddaughter, administered by Stu until she came of age. My daughter would have access to the income from a small investment account I'd earmarked separately. It wasn't nothing, it was fair, but the house was no longer a pending transaction. I didn't tell them. I want you to understand that. I had this document signed and filed, and I went home and made chili and watched the evening news and did not say a word. March came. My son-in-law started in again at Sunday dinner. It had become a pattern by then. He'd wait until I seemed relaxed and then bring up, gently, the subject of the future. This time he had a specific place in mind. He'd done research. He showed me photos on his phone, bright lobbies, smiling staff, a man about my age playing what appeared to be pickleball. "It's not cheap," he said, "but with what you'd get from the house, you'd be more than covered for, well, realistically, for the rest of your life." "With what I'd get from the house," I said. "Right, I mean, who decides when I sell the house?" He smiled, the way you smile at a child asking a complicated question. "Well, nobody's deciding anything right now, Frank. We're just exploring." "I've already done some exploring of my own," I said. My daughter looked up. "I updated my estate documents in January. I kept my voice level. I've spent enough years in engineering meetings to know that the calmer you sound, the more carefully people listen. The house goes into trust for your daughter when I'm gone. It'll be hers at 25. Can't be sold before then. Not by me. Not by anyone with power of attorney. Not by any estate proceeding. It's done. The silence at that table was one of the more complete silences I've experienced. My granddaughter, who was 4 and unbothered by adult tension, picked up a roll and tore it in half. My son-in-law set down his fork. "Frank." "I'm not angry," I said, and I meant it. I want to be very clear that I'm not sitting here in anger. I'm sitting here having made a decision that I'm at peace with. The house stays in the family. Your daughter will have it. That's the end of the conversation about the house. He started to say something about what they'd been planning, about the practicalities, and I'll give him this. He stopped himself. He looked at my daughter. My daughter was looking at the table. "Dad," she said finally. "Becca." "I'm sorry." Her voice broke on it, which I hadn't expected. I should have told him to stop. A long time ago. "I'm sorry." "I know you are." "I didn't want." She stopped, pressed her fingers against her mouth for a second. "I didn't want to lose the house either. The house where Mum..." She couldn't finish it. And there it was, under all of it, under her husband's spreadsheets and his pickleball brochures, there was my daughter missing her mother and not knowing how to say so. There was a woman who'd spent 6 years watching her childhood home get further away and had made the mistake of letting her husband convince her that ownership was the same as keeping. I reached across and put my hand over hers. "You're not losing the house," I said. "You never had to lose the house. It's going to be here for your daughter the same way it was here for you. That's what your mother would have wanted. That's what I want." My son-in-law was quiet for the rest of dinner. He helped clear the dishes. He got my granddaughter's coat on when it was time to leave. At the door, he shook my hand, not in the polished way he usually did, but more carefully, like he was recalibrating something. "I wasn't trying to push you out," he said. I don't know if I believed him. I think he believed himself, which is a different thing. I think he told himself a story about being practical and forward-thinking and taking care of his family, and somewhere in that story I had become a variable to be optimized rather than a man to be considered. "I know," I said, same 2 words my daughter had said through the baby monitor, only mine were colder. Spring came the way it always does in this part of the country, grudgingly then all at once. My daughter started coming by on her own sometimes, on weekday afternoons while her husband was at work and my granddaughter was at preschool. We'd have coffee at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd done her homework 25 years ago. We talked about her mother more than we talked about her in years. She asked me about the early days, before she was born, what her mother was like at 22. I told her everything I could remember. The baby monitor is still on my nightstand. My granddaughter sleeps better now, doesn't wake up in the night much anymore, but I keep it on anyway. Some habits are worth keeping. Last month my granddaughter asked me why the maple tree in the backyard was so big. I told her I planted it the year her mother was born, that we planted it to celebrate. She thought about that for a second with the intense seriousness of a 4-year-old processing information. "So it's our tree," she said. "It's your tree," I told her. "When you're big, the whole yard will be yours, the tree, the garden, the cave. Grandpa's cave is mine. Grandpa's cave is yours." She seemed satisfied with that. She went back to drawing on the porch steps with sidewalk chalk, dragging a fat piece of yellow across the concrete in a long looping line that went nowhere in particular and looked from above like the beginning of something. I stood in the doorway and watched her and felt, for the first time in a long time, like everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. My wife used to say that the things you build with your hands outlast the things you build with your mouth. She said it about the garden, about the workshop, about the addition we put on the back of the house when my daughter was 7. She was right. the way she was right about most things. The house is still here, the maple is still here, and my granddaughter draws in yellow chalk on the porch steps, and none of that is for sale. There's a moment, somewhere in the middle of all this, that I keep coming back to. Not the baby monitor, not the dinner table. It's the afternoon I sat in Stu's office and heard myself say out loud what I actually wanted. Not what I was afraid of, not what I was reacting to, but what I genuinely wanted for the people who would come after me. That was the moment things shifted, not because I'd outmaneuvered anyone, because I'd finally been honest with myself about what mattered. I think about what my son-in-law was doing, and I don't think he woke up one morning and decided to be the villain of this story. He made a series of small choices, practical choices, he'd have called them, that added up to treating a living person like a future transaction. That's how most harm happens. Not in one dramatic decision, but in 100 small ones, each of which feels reasonable at the time. The accumulation is what gets you, and the accumulation is also, I've found, what teaches you, if you're willing to look at it clearly. Becca knew. That's the part I had to sit with for a long time. My daughter knew what was being planned in her name, and she let it move forward because she was grieving her mother and afraid of losing the last physical place that held her. I understand that. I do, but understanding it doesn't mean it didn't cost something between us. What rebuilt that, slowly, over coffee on Tuesday afternoons, was her willingness to say, "I'm sorry," without making excuses, and my willingness to believe her. That takes a kind of moral courage that doesn't get talked about enough. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, where you admit to yourself and to someone you love that you chose wrong and you choose differently going forward. What I did, updating the trust, sitting through those months of careful watching before I acted, required me to think clearly when I wanted to react emotionally. That's harder than it sounds. There were nights I wanted to call my daughter and say, "Do you know what your husband is planning?" There were dinners where I wanted to flick the table on the whole careful performance. I didn't, because I knew that heat wouldn't build anything. What I needed wasn't satisfaction in the moment. I needed a solution that would still be standing when the dust settled. That's the difference between a reaction and a decision. Reactions are easy. Decisions are slow, and they cost you sleep, and they require you to trust your own judgment when everything in you wants to just be done with it. And the steadiness required, just to keep showing up, keep raking the yard, keep making chili on Sunday while all of this moved quietly underneath. That kind of persistence is its own thing, not stubbornness, not pride, just the refusal to let someone else's panic become your own. My granddaughter draws in yellow chalk on the porch steps and doesn't know any of this happened. That's the point. The work I did that winter was so she'd never have to know. The best things we build are the ones that become invisible because they're holding everything else up. The maple tree is still out back. Joanna planted it with me the year Becca was born, her hands in the dirt next to mine on a morning in April. My granddaughter thinks it's hers now. She's right. It was always going to be hers. Some things just needed the right paperwork to say so out loud.